There's a further problem here, which I call the circularity problem, the problem of question begging within science. And it goes something like this. How is the scientific method validated? If you use the scientific method to validate the scientific method, then science is circular, similar to religion. So one of the critiques leveled against religious people, like a Christian, for example, is a scientific person or an atheist will speak with a Christian and ask the Christian, like, well, so you believe God exists. How do you know God exists? And the Christian will confidently say, well, the Bible says so. And the atheist will say, well, sure, it says so, but how do you know the Bible is true? And the Christian will say, well, the Bible was written by God, obviously. And the atheist will say, but that's circular logic, you see. How can I argue with you when you're justifying your worldview in a circle? And then he'll smugly say this as though he's superior. He's in a superior position. But then we take a scientist and we have the exact same problem. I tell the scientist, well, okay, so you're a scientist, you believe in science. How do you know it's valid? Well, the scientific method is valid. How do you know that? Well, because obviously we've used the scientific method to validate science. It's a closed circle. You see the problem here is that if there is any mistake within your scientific method that you're not conscious of, you will be using that method to validate your own method, thereby doubling down on the mistake, therefore creating a blind spot within your method. Therefore, data outside your method will not have a way of entering into your method because you're going to be in denial about it because you assume your method is true without ever validating it other than through your method. It's sort of like saying, I'm always right. Well, but how do you know you're always right? Well, because I always feel that I'm right. But what about in this case when you're wrong? Well, that case, I can't be wrong because I feel that I'm right. Yeah, but what if your feeling that you're right isn't right and it's wrong? But I feel that it's right. Yeah, that's the problem. That's the whole problem. You got to see through that. And in order to see through that, see, you can't do it with science. You need meta-science to be able to do this. Because if you're only confining yourself to science, and one of the tricks the scientific mind uses, it says, well, but I have to stick to science. I can't go outside of science because if I go outside of science, then that's falsehood. Meta-science, that's woo-woo stuff, Leo. That's not truth. But you see, that's exactly what the religious person is doing. Like if I tell a Muslim, for example, hey, take some psychedelics and maybe you'll discover that there's something outside of Islam, or like go study some Christian texts and you'll discover something outside of Islam. To the Muslim, this you can't do that because for him to even go into a Christian church is already a violation of his own faith. You see, that's something evil, that's something wrong. So he's never going to go. He's never going to read about Christianity. He's not going to read about Buddhism. He's not going to take a psychedelic. Why? Because his worldview tells him that that's all false. That's all the work of Satan. Right. Now, you scientists don't have an idea of Satan, but you behave in the exact same way. Anything outside your narrow confines of science you consider invalid. And yet, of course, the very confines of science have never been validated. So there you go. That's your problem right there. So actually, in truth, it's impossible to distinguish science from pseudoscience. If you could do that, you would already have all the truth in the universe, and therefore you wouldn't need to do science. It begs the question when you assume that you can distinguish science from pseudoscience, which is why it's so silly. People on Reddit and YouTube and elsewhere, they make these accusations of like, oh, that's pseudoscience. But actually, you don't know that. You're begging the question. There is no clear line between science and pseudoscience. You have to do science to distinguish between the two. There's also no clear line between science and philosophy. In fact, science is a subset of philosophy, and historically, you should know this if you've taken some philosophy classes, is that, of course, science used to be called natural philosophy. Science is an offshoot, a branch from philosophy. And the reason that's not just an accident. It had to be that way because the only way you can do science is from a larger domain of meta-science. In a sense, the meta-science comes first before the science. And when you forget that, and then you dismiss philosophy, this is also part of the myth of science, is this misconception that, oh, well, philosophy, this is not true science. We don't want to have anything to do with philosophy. If we take philosophy seriously, that actually dilutes our science, makes it less pure. Nothing could be further from the truth. Look at this. The belief that philosophy is dumb and irrelevant and unscientific and unnecessary to the hard sciences is itself an untested metaphysical epistemic claim, which you hold unconsciously. What you have to notice here is that your mind, your ego mind, is playing tricks on you. It's constantly, the power of the ego mind is that it has the power to dismiss or to deny anything that it wants or doesn't like. You can deny any point, any fact, any interpretation, any argument, any logic at any time, as long as it suits you. And you will convince yourself that what you're doing is truthful when actually it's just self-serving.